Go.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We start in the name of Allah, the gracious, most gracious, most merciful. We bear witness there is no deity worthy worship except Allah, praise and glory be to Him, and that Muhammad is the seal of messengers. He was sent as a mercy to all mankind. May peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, his family, his companions, and those who follow his path on the day of judgment. I greet you with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, dear brothers, dear sisters, dear viewers, and of course our guest today, Asad Zaman. And this is Dr. Abdul Aziz, with the host with this A2Z show on the first day of 2021. 1 year has gone, and we wish you all, inshallah, happy and prosperous new year for all our listeners as well and the whole world as well. And we pray to God, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate this hardship of the pandemic and hardship from other people as well who are facing all kinds of trials, whether wars, earthquakes in Croatia, snow and landslide in, I think, in Europe as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate this hardship and turn this hardship to ease. And of course, those who have been affected with this pandemic, may Allah give them a cure. And those who passed away, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and have mercy upon them and give their parents, their relatives and families patience and great reward. Ameen. Of course, we have a lot of things on the local front, national, European, international, worldwide, and maybe we talk about Muslim issues as well towards the end as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Asad Zaman, how are you? Inshallah, okay?
Alhamdulillah. I hope you're fine as well with your health.
Alhamdulillah, and Allah make it easy, inshallah, for everybody as well. I think I presume you have been on this Friday prayer today on the Muslim Youth Foundation.
Foundation did a couple of khutbahs, obviously being the 1st of January and that being in the sort of middle of the city centre. It wasn't as crowded as it normally is because obviously most of the shops are closed today. But it was still a decent turnout.
Right, and the topic I think was
the topic
from what you have birth and all this kind of thing.
Okay, I think the reception got a bit bad there, but yes, the topic was, well, it's the new year. Obviously not a Muslim New Year, but the new year, the calendar that obviously this system that we're living in, that's the system, that's the calendar they follow, and of course the decision makers of the world are following this calendar, not our calendar. So it is important, and therefore it's a time for reflection as well. And we need to reflect upon really what is the purpose of our existence. This is something that we need to arrive to and reflect over and over and over again, so that we don't lose track, because it's so easy, with all the things that are going on, COVID. I mean, the whole of last year, the whole of 2020 was about COVID. I don't think we remember anything else apart from COVID. And of course, it still continues. But of course, that is a distraction from really the purpose of our existence, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I didn't create insan nor jinn, but to worship me. And of course, worship in Islam has a very broad definition. Essentially, any action that we do which pleases Allah is classified as worship, as ibadah. So we are now talking about Islam. We are both in a state of ibadah. We are both in a state of worship. And we are getting reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply for indulging in this talk. And, in the process, enlightening fellow Muslims, giving a reminder to them, as well as information which hopefully will be of use to them. So the whole conversation becomes an act of ibadah. And, we get reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. So really, it's a case of reflecting upon our relationship with Allah, and that means becoming totally conscious of every single one of our actions, everything that we do. We need to pass it through that filter of acceptability to Allah, because that is the whole point of our existence, is to make sure that we are living our lives in obedience to our Creator. And by being conscious of all of our actions, then we become very careful and cautious not to indulge in sin, because that will take us outside of the domain of Islam. So long as we are within that state of obedience and ibadah, then we are within the domain of Islam. The moment we sin, we are actually heading towards the exit. So in order to be conscious, we need to make sure that we are building ourselves up. First of all, intellectually and spiritually. Very, very important that we, if we are, first of all, we have to be convinced of this faith ourselves. And the only way we're going to be convinced is by having a true understanding of what this deen is about. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says very clearly, that when there are many, many ways of life, there's many, many ideologies, faiths, religions in this world. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us very clearly that Islam, al-Islam, is what He has chosen for the whole of humanity. We need to understand that, because when we understand that, then we will understand that we need to now, because the Prophet ﷺ was the Khatam al-Nabiyyin, because there will be no more prophets after the Prophet ﷺ, therefore we become the messengers of that message, because ultimately we need to make sure that we are conveying that message to the whole of humanity. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us very clearly that that is something very, very important that we need to do. When He says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. What better words can you utter from your mouth than words which endear, attract, invite others to the path of Allah, away from the darkness of Jahiliyyah towards the light of Sirat al-Mustaqim. So that is our role, always to be sources of khair for the whole of humanity. So anyone who comes into contact with us benefits from that interaction. They don't feel, for example, if it's a financial transaction that we are interacting with someone else regarding, then at the end of that interaction, the person, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, they should feel that they have been dealt with in a very fair and just manner. And that we haven't tried to rip them off, for example, if it's a financial transaction. So, and this is how Islam spread in many parts of the world, like Malaysia and perhaps Indonesia and other places, where it wasn't through preaching, but simply through trading. Their trade was so fair and so transparent that the people were just amazed. How can you be so honest? Because we don't come across honest business people, honest traders, honest merchants. And so obviously the people started looking at their faith. And that is what we need to be doing at all times, making sure that we are good representatives of our faith, having a clear understanding of what our faith is about. And then ensuring that we do all we can to convey that message. Because remember, on the Day of Judgment, the person who has lived all his life rejecting Allah, perhaps could be our next door neighbor. He will say to Allah that, yes, I'm guilty of rejecting you in my life. I did not believe in you. I did not obey you. And therefore I do deserve punishment. I accept. However, this neighbor of mine, he was gifted with this faith, but he never told me about it, ever. So if I'm guilty of not obeying you because I didn't know, or I didn't, nobody came and told me, this neighbor is also guilty. So Allah, you're going to punish me for rejecting you, yes, but this neighbor of mine, this Muslim neighbor, also should be punished as well. And of course, that's a very powerful argument, because if we have the haqq and we are living with those who don't, then the responsibility is on our shoulders to make sure that we convey that message. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very, very clearly how we can do that best when he says, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah, invite others to the path of Allah with wisdom, wal maw'izat al hasana, and with beautiful language. Wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and use the best arguments, the best methodology, whatever arguments and methodology they come up with, you come up with superior arguments and methods of getting your message across and answering them. And that is something that, we can only do if we have a clear understanding of our faith. So that means we need to make sure that we are educated within our faith. It's no good to answer to someone who says, why are you a Muslim? And you say, well, my mum and dad were Muslims. That's why I'm a Muslim. That is really a pretty rubbish answer. Because for us, we should be Muslims because we are convinced by the deen of Islam. We are convinced by its message. That is the reason why we should be Muslims. That we understand that this is the haqq. We understand that this is the message from the creator of humanity to the whole of humanity. We shouldn't be Muslims only because our mother and fathers were Muslim. And therefore, it becomes really, really important to understand our responsibility. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how important, how beautiful this message is. When he says, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله, that you are the best of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, you, the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are the khayra ummah. You are the best of people. Why? Because you encourage what is right and you forbid what is wrong, and of course you believe in Allah. Ibn Kathir, on this, in his tafsir on this ayah, says something very, very interesting. That's something that we really need to really ponder over. He said, this ayah makes every single one of us leaders of the world. It puts the mantle of leadership on our shoulders. Why? What is the job of a leader? To lead people, to lead humanity. This is what Allah is saying to us. And what is that role? Lead them from where to where? Out of the darkness of Jahiliyyah towards the Nur, towards the light of Al-Islam, up towards Sirat al-Mustaqim. We must never, ever forget that that is our role in life. Whatever other problems there are, whether it's COVID or, yes, we are worried about our income, our jobs, we're worried about our children growing up within the deen, some are leaving the deen, others are behaving badly. All of these are distractions from the real purpose, which is to ensure that we are always within a state of ibadah. So whether we are dealing with our children, with our wives, with our neighbors, whether we are business people, whether we are students or teachers, whatever our position, our status in life, that has got to be uppermost in our minds, that I must never go outside of that domain of worship. And that means everything I say, everything I do is in accordance with Allah's will. It pleases Allah and does not.
Speaking about there is individual responsibility and there is a collective responsibility. Therefore, as individuals, you have to do it. As somebody said, the quorum is even you can spread my message with one verse. The Prophet ﷺ said, and collectively as well, and on organization, as we have a lot of organization, mosques, more than 2,000 mosques as well, and Muslim organizations, and Muslim states as well, and their roles in spreading the right message of Islam and giving an example of how Muslims should behave themselves on the top as leaders or government or and as states, and of course as people, as individuals as well, as a society, as a community. But therefore the responsibility is upon everybody's shoulder, and even if nobody is doing it, you and me and everybody, we should be doing it. And as you started right, even with our next door neighbor, a next door neighbor can be about 40 on each side. And of course, that message should be spread to everybody. And of course, in the social media and the internet now, of course, Islam is always on the headlines anyway, sometimes for most of the time for wrong things, not for the good things. But I believe that those opportunities, you can turn them to from bad to good as well, isn't it?
Exactly. We do our bit, and at least on the day of judgment, they cannot say, we didn't know. And that is what they will definitely say. We didn't know. Anyhow,
right.
So that was the general gist of the message.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think I might link this. You know that you talked about we Muslims and behavior and individual responsibilities, but that what you spoke about, there is actually a news about the almost more than 15% of the prison population in UK is Muslims, and most of the offenses are 70% are actually drug related.
Very sad. Yep. I mean, I've been following this over the past maybe 10, 15 years now. And I remember it was about the prison population in the UK was about 10% Muslim. And I thought that's so bad. We are only 5% of the population of this country, and yet there's 10% of the prison population is Muslim. And then slowly I saw it rise year after year after year. Became 11%, 12%, and it's staggering. And now it's over 15%, about 15.2, 15.3%, heading towards 16. I mean, as a Muslim community, it's a matter of shame for us. We should be an example of obedience and obedience to the law, and of being good citizens. We should be an example for everyone. And yet, we're an example of bad citizenship, sadly. When we have 15%, we are 3 times overrepresented in prison. And 70% of that is for drugs-related offenses. We know that there's quite a large number of people who convert to Islam within prison, but that's maybe less than 10%. But the bulk of those who are in prison who are Muslims, they entered prison as Muslims. And for drugs related, either they're drug dealers or they've been taking drugs or related to drugs. So this is a very major problem within the Muslim community, and we as Muslims can't stay quiet about it, because it's clearly damaging our youth. They are damaging the rest of society with the drugs, and they're damaging the reputation of the Muslim community and of Islam. So it's a lose-lose situation all around. That's why we as Muslims, if we come across any friends or relations who are indulging in this, if our nasiha, our advice and admonition is not sufficient, then we should really have little hesitation in handing them over to the police and letting them know that, look, I know my brother, my cousin, my whoever, nephew, niece, or usually boys, men, is indulging in this criminal behavior, and you need to do something about it, because these people might say, oh well, we haven't got enough money and this, that, well, I mean, destroying somebody else's life, because this is what they're doing by selling drugs, can never be any justification for trying to improve your own life financially. It simply can't. So that sort of argument just won't hold. So yeah, it's a really, really bad situation. We as a Muslim community have got to get our act together and make sure that we are bringing our children up to obey the law, because largely obeying the law of Britain is also most of the actions that people do to end up in prison are also against the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not that they're indulging in behavior that is acceptable in Islam, but not acceptable in British law. That's why they're ending up in prison. No, it's not acceptable in Islam either.
So, and you said about 15%. Of course, the majority of prisoners, and I think regulated as well, are the indigenous people, who are here, and therefore the majority of the prison are full of those people as well from the rest of the population. And of course, the drug problem is a drug problem, and it is faced by the whole community. Do you think that the government is doing something about it to address this problem?
Well, obviously the government could always be doing more. But the problem is that there is so much crime and so little money now, that, for example, burglary here in Manchester, it's a paradise for non-violent burglars. That's what the police have done. There've been so many cases. It's happened to myself as well. You get burgled, and you have to keep phoning the police for them to be even interested in even coming down. Never mind all these, we see these in these investigations and these series on TV and whatever, police coming down and forensics, you're taking fingerprints and this, that, the other. I mean, they don't even bother coming down. And I think on one occasion I phoned about 7-8 times to the police that my colleagues had been burgled, and they came after 3 weeks. And I even had CCTV footage of the burglar, so they could have distributed these to all their police forces. They could have been found easily without too much of a problem, because their faces were very, very clear. But they didn't bother. And when you tell them, they say, "Oh, we've got murders and rapes to deal with. Nobody's been hurt. You've been burgled. You might have had all your most important information, and your laptops and mobiles have stolen." No, they're not interested. They just are not interested. If somebody gets killed, hurt, then they'll show more interest. But if it's just a burglary, they don't care. Quite literally, they don't care. Anyway,
all right. I think prevent is better than cure. I think there's a lot to do on education.
Well, we have to bring our children up to be decent, law-abiding citizens. Definitely.
Of course. Okay. I think on the good news as well, there was almost about 21 Muslim personalities listed, awarded for different achievements.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, if you look at, so this what you're saying is the 26% out of the 26 out of the 100 people chosen for something special, women, that is, who were chosen for having done something special, were actually Muslim women, which is obviously something that we should be very proud of. And these women are from all walks of life, from activists to professionals, to one is even the head of a space agency. So yeah, we don't realize how integrated Muslims are within within the West as a whole. I mean, obviously we're Britain, but yes, Muslims are in all departments. They're counselors, they're doctors, they're accountants, then the space working in, the physicists, the lecturers, teachers. We are contributing in a major way to the development, economic and scientific development of this country. So that's something we can be very proud of. And we are contributing over £30 billion to the British economy every year.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a significant amount. And we're giving well over £100 million every year to charity. We are the most charitable, the most generous of the religious groups in the country. So, alhamdulillah, that's something very positive regarding the community.
I think we will go on this, I think a little bit about this COVID-19 and the different tier system. And of course, now they have announced that there will be some delay for the entrance of schools and colleges because of this.
I mean, Dr. Aziz, the reality is that the government and the scientists really have no idea how to deal with the situation. For many of them, it's the first time they're dealing with it. I know we had the SARS virus, I think, is it 2003 or something, but it didn't really affect Britain. And so the scientists here didn't really get that involved. So this is the first one that, they've had to deal with. And they really are just playing catch up. They really don't understand what on earth is going on. Now, okay, so we've got the vaccines and it's been tested. I mean, it hasn't been tested as thoroughly as it needs to be tested. I don't think it was even tested on animals. Normally it's tested on animals, mice and what have you first for many, many months to see if there are any side effects. And, that procedure hasn't taken place because of the urgency of the situation. And before they started to give this vaccine out, I think the Pfizer BioNTech, the Turkish couple in Germany, they only tested it on about 40,000 people, which sounds like a large number. But when it comes to testing out a vaccine, it really isn't as big as it sounds. And at the same time, it's the amount of time they've spent in the testing process is hardly been a few months. And normally these vaccines are tested over at least a year or so on many, many animals, and then goes from animals to humans, etc. So that thorough testing hasn't taken place, but so long as you and I are not next in line to take the vaccine, we can wait for maybe a few months until a few million people have been vaccinated, and then we will know if it's safe or not.
And for the schools to open, do you think that it has to open?
Well, the teachers don't want them to open because the teachers don't want to catch the virus from the students. And, it's happening. So teachers would prefer not to have these schools open. But the government is saying more damage will be done to the children by this lockdown if children are not allowed to go to school than if they are allowed to go to school. So it's a staggered return to school. It's not going to be all in one because it's, they have to make sure the procedures are in place and working properly because they will find issues and problems.
So they want to test people, all the people, students.
Well, now that the vaccine, a few 100,000 people have been tested, or maybe even 1 million or so, once not tested, have been given the vaccine, once they are satisfied, or once the number of people who've had the vaccine or have got immunity reaches what they call herd immunity. That's maybe 60% of the population have received the the vaccine. And they are, by the way, now saying that only because of this new strain, which is extremely contagious, 70 times more than the previous one. The previous one, the R rate was, I think, about 0.9, and only 1/3 of the, it was 30% spread. The virus was, was spreading at 30%. Now it's 300%. That's the difference. It's really, really skyrocketed the number of people. I think yesterday was about 55,000 people had caught the virus, and about 1,000 people had died. So, it's worrying because nobody knows where it's going. And they're saying that we don't even need really, because the BioNTech and the other vaccines, you need two jabs. And they're saying we're only going to do one. Now, one will give you about, on the BioNTech one, about 90% immunity. Now, that's not too bad. The second jab, which is supposed to be after 3 weeks, was to push that up to about 96%. So they're saying, well, for 5-6% is not going to be a massive difference. So rather than give the same person two, why don't we just give them, get everybody one? It'll be a lot quicker. We can get through, the population much quicker this way. So this is what they're planning to do now, is to just give one jab so they can reach about 90-odd%. But they're really hoping for the AstraZeneca, the vaccine that was developed in Oxford University, because that's far, far cheaper. It's only about, I think, about £3 for a dose, whereas the BioNTech one is over £20 a dose. So far, far more expensive. And also, they prefer the AstraZeneca because you can keep that vaccine, I think, at room temperature almost, or just a freezer temperature. Whereas the other one, the BioNTech one, the Turkish couple who developed it, that needs to be kept at -70, which is obviously much more difficult.
Okay. Let's move on to Brexit, and of course, now we are out now.
Yeah,
with the deal, anyway, we have to see the devil is in the details. How was the deal and everything, and how it will affect the trade. Of course, Britain always had about 400 billion trade with the EU, and 5 billion.
Sorry, let me correct you. 250 billion.
Right, and there is actually maybe, I think, a deficit about 100 billion, and they will. I hope they will maintain it. And do you think that of course, there's an exception between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and of course, Gibraltar and Spain stay the same as well for the movement of people as well. And therefore, there's just the Euro channel and all the goods going and coming from European Union to UK and vice versa. And do you think that then Mr. Boris Johnson has fulfilled his promise?
Well, the reality is that only some of the core Brexit details have been sort of agreed upon. There are many, many other areas where it says to be discussed. Oh, yes. There are many areas within this agreement which basically have not been discussed. There's just not been enough time to discuss them. And it just says to be discussed. There's at least maybe 100 areas like that. If I remember, like, look, Britain is a major financial center of the world, okay? And it hasn't even been discussed how Britain will remain this financial center and what the rules and regulations will be now with Brexit and its financial relationship with Europe and the EU, etc. I mean, none of that's really been discussed, and security arrangements haven't really been discussed in any detail. So Brexit hasn't finished. This is really the end of the beginning. That's all it is. It's the end of the beginning. Now this is going to continue for, I don't know, maybe a few years before they actually finalize every single aspect. So there are loads and loads of areas, categories, which just says to be agreed upon, to be agreed upon. Also, it was interesting that Britain signed its first agreement before Brexit, and who was it with? With Turkey. And that's interesting because with America now putting sanctions on Turkey, it seems that, well, Britain needs friends, and so does Turkey. And so they've kind of brought themselves together at the right time, because even America, Biden has made it clear that Britain is not high up on the list of favorite nations, or discussing the trade agreements, etc. It's not a priority. They made it clear. See, for America now, the priority will be the EU. Britain, having left this massive club of over 500 million people, the largest trading bloc in the entire world. I mean, Britain's departure has really made a massive dent in the EU. 17% of its income has just disappeared. Britain is a major player. It's not a minor country. So, yeah, and of course, we can see the end of the United Kingdom now very clearly.
Because of Scottish, wants independence as well.
Well, Scotland didn't vote for Brexit. Scotland voted to remain in the EU. So did Northern Ireland. They voted to remain in the EU. And now, with the very complicated situation that you have, because of course the island of Ireland has been, is split between Northern Ireland, which is part of Britain, and the Republic of Ireland, which is totally independent. Now, there's going to be a big push to uniting Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Republic as one, because it's one territory. So now that there is actually a trade barrier between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland, because they didn't want a barrier between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that we are seeing possibly the end of, with the Republic of Ireland joining up with Northern Ireland. And so Britain losing Northern Ireland as well. For those who don't know, the UK, United Kingdom, is Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. And the way things are looking, Scotland, it doesn't want to be away from the EU. They voted for the EU. So it's possible that they may break away. And also it is possible that the Northern Ireland will break away from the UK as well and become part of the Republic of Ireland, or become one united Ireland. And it's not inconceivable that the Welsh are going to, if they don't feel that England is treating them too well, they may want to go their separate ways and again apply for EU membership. So then you've just got tiny little England. And even England, don't be too surprised if in maybe 50 years' time, London says, you know what, we were better off in the EU. So you know what, we will break away from England, because London has got a massive population, about 1/10 of the, well, more than 1/10, I think.
It's about 8 million, yes.
It's over 10 million, I think, easily over 10 million. They have said it, that we would rather be in the EU. So in 50 years' time, who knows what's going to happen? But it's not impossible that London may break away from England as well. So who knows?
Time will tell then, yeah. Right.
Yeah,
I think let's move on international. I think there is one. I think this one about these Indian TV channel fined for
yeah.
hate speech against Pakistan.
Well, it's really it's about time, really. I've listened to these Indian TV talking about Pakistan, and it's pure hate speech, and a lot of it is just complete rubbish as well. I mean, talk about fake news. You need to listen to some of these, not all of them, but some of these Indian, of course, they're mostly Hindu run channels, and the kind of rubbish that comes out of them is just amazing, and the hatred against Muslims and against Pakistan is amazing on some of these channels because they're controlled by the BJP, the ruling party.
Mm.
So for the first time, one Indian channel, Hindu obviously, has been fined a fairly significant amount, and I think it might even have been banned um, for its anti-Pakistani propaganda. So that's certainly a step in the right direction,
Right.
and
And
hopefully,
yeah,
yeah,
and by the same way, I think token because of Kashmir and Jammu and all the issue there, about almost 200 million Muslims in India as well. Now
yeah.
there is a move about in Kashmir and Jammu to close Muslim schools there.
Well, it's no, that's in Assam, which is a state in India.
Mm-hmm.
700 madrasas, Islamic schools. They are state funded. Um, they are going to close them by April. Now, that's a major blow for Muslims wanting to maintain their identity. That's how they maintain their identity, through the madrasas. And the Indian government has said, no, we don't want to fund these madrasas anymore. So that's going to be a major issue for the Muslim community. And of course, recently, marriage between Muslims and Hindus was banned. Even if the girl converts to Islam, they automatically assume that she was forced into converting to Islam from Hinduism, and then the marriage took place. So that there's been a law passed that you can't do that. But and of course, many legitimate marriages where the girl is actually consented and she's converted to Islam, perhaps, and sometimes she hasn't converted to Islam. But the marriage is still gone ahead, and the government has come in and said, no, they broke it up. They broke it up. And now a law has been passed. It's illegal to do that. So how is a couple going to prove that a girl is going to prove she hasn't been forced to accept Hinduism or accept Islam from Hinduism? So, yeah, they're just making life more difficult for Muslims, quite simply.
I think
And this,
on the same token, we hear about the in Sri Lanka and the forced cremation of deceased Muslim
yeah, that's
there,
right. It's not just
and
Muslims; it's also Christians as well.
the I think the Muslim Council of Britain has issued a press release on regarding this, and how can somebody, this say the Muslim Council of Britain to launch a legal action against Sri Lanka government for forced cremation.
Yeah,
And
what the parliament that has said in Sri Lanka is anyone who dies of COVID must be burned. Now, for Buddhists and for Hindus, it's a Buddhist country, majority Buddhist country. Muslims are about 9%, Christians about 7% in Sri Lanka. So it's not a problem for them to cremate, but where's the evidence? Why do you need to burn a body that's died of COVID? What's wrong with burying it safely, as they do in this country? So this is an anti-Muslim and, well, you could say anti-Christian as well, move. And it's something, of course, which is totally unacceptable for Muslims, as it is strictly forbidden to burn the body, to cremate it, when a person dies. So, and there's absolutely nothing wrong, nothing unsafe about burying a body that's died of COVID-19.
And
So
in
this,
Islam as well, in Islam, we apply the tradition of Prophet, peace be upon him, that once a person dies, with sooner he's buried, the better. Therefore, we take care of all the precautions and all this. And the Tayyib Ali, partner and leading London law firm, he said the forced cremations of Muslim bodies in Sri Lanka are a serious violation of the religious freedom of minority group. It is a violation of international law to delay return the family member's body for burial in a timely way unless there is good reason to do so. In this case, the Sri Lanka authorities have departed from the World Health Organization's recommendation for safe management of a dead body during the coronavirus pandemic without any justification. In addition, the Sri Lanka Supreme Court's rapid and arisen dismissal of the application made by family members of the deceased leaves no domestic remedy to what some have described as an ongoing persecution of the Muslim minority in Sri Lanka. We are now preparing to bring this matter to the urgent attention of the United Nations Human Rights Committee for resolution.
well, that's it. So pressure needs to be put on the Sri Lankan government to not force Muslims and Christians to burn the relatives or the people who've died of COVID-19. So that's all we can do is just put
And he
pressure
said
on.
even the Sri Lankan government's policy of forced cremation is unconstitutional in its very nature and
right.
continues to devastate the families of the deceased. It's now imperative for the international community to urge the Sri Lankan government to reverse this policy immediately, and the Muslim Council of Britain Task Force will pursue the necessary legal action to end this violation of human rights and allow families to bury their deceased with dignity. I think on the human rights as well, I think we may link up with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, northeast of China, and why the Muslim world, 53 countries, including I think maybe few who spoke out against the incarceration and prison internment and forced labor and all kinds of things you can hear about.
Yeah.
Why the Muslim countries, majority of Muslim countries, are not actually standing with the Uyghurs Muslims.
This is so sad. It really is very, very sad indeed. And what the mistake that Muslim leaders, and you know, there are 57 majority Muslim countries in the OIC. And clearly they're looking at the bigger picture in terms of trade, etc., the rising power of the economic and political and, of course, military power that China is heading towards. And this Belt and Road project, which is, you know, multi-billion pound project, which links up many countries in terms of goods being produced, because, you know, we know that China is the factory of the world. And so they're exploiting this by building all this new Silk Road. The old Silk Road, of course, was a major trading road from China going through Pakistan and various other countries. And this is much more ambitious than even that. And unfortunately, you know, the Muslims in China, 10 million of them in, of course, the Xinjiang region that you just mentioned, which of course is East Turkestan. This was not even part. This is not even part of China. It only became part of China, I think, in 1949, if I remember correctly. And because there's a huge amount of natural resources there in that region, it's a massive area of land that was East Turkestan. And just like Tibet, China has just absorbed it within as part of China. to expand its territory and steal, someone else's natural resources. So, yeah, when we see the real sad situation of our Uyghur Muslims, where literally their Islam and their traditions are being ripped out of them, literally ripped out of them, to create atheist, communist, Han Chinese. This is really the whole purpose of this. These so-called, these concentration camps. They call them education camps, but they're concentration camps. And everybody knows what's going on, and they turn a blind eye to it. And it's so sad because they're obviously looking at not wanting to say anything bad to China, to have, to be on good terms with China because of trade. And they're just letting the Chinese do what they like to, over 10 million Muslims. And it's not just the Uyghur Muslims. There's over 23 million Muslims in China. And all of them are now being subjected to the same program of having their faith ripped out of them, their traditions, their way of life ripped out of them, and to have them replace, their beliefs and their traditions with atheist, communist, traditions, Han Chinese traditions. It's very painful to see what's going on and see, we're supposed to be 1.8 billion Muslims, almost 2 billion Muslims. That's over a quarter of the world. And yet we're so weak. As the Prophet ﷺ said, a time will come when you are like froth on water. There'll be many of you, but useless, no power, no influence. And that is exactly where we are today. We're a quarter of the world. But how can the Chinese get away with murder? It's because of the weakness of our leaders. And that weakness comes from weakness of Iman and weakness of their economies because of massive
the Chinese claim about separatism and all this. Do you think, is it a factor?
Well, the right of self-determination is there within the UN charters. As I said earlier on, 1949, East Turkestan, which is completely separate to China, was absorbed into China, was forcibly, just like Chechnya was forced into Russia, or part of the, Russia. And of course, you've got Dagestan as well. And these have been forced into Russia. So similarly, China has done the same thing with Tibet and East Turkestan. And no one has said anything. And so those people, yes, they are Muslims, and they've got their own tradition, their own language. Their language is not Chinese, Han Chinese, Mandarin, or Cantonese. It is Turkic. So they have much more similarity with Turkey and Uzbekistan and all the other Muslim countries in the region than they have with China. And they don't even look Chinese. If you look at them, they're much more. They look Turkic Muslims rather than Han Chinese. But unfortunately, because their land is so rich and is huge, it's got a lot of, I think, gas and oil and what have you. And it's a major route. It's a very important route from China to Asia through Pakistan. And so they will not let go of that, whatever happens.
Okay. I think you spoke about Pakistan. You mentioned many times Pakistan and the relationship of Pakistan with Saudi Arabia and pressure put on Pakistan as well, economic pressure and diplomatic pressure and political pressure.
Yes, that's another. Look, the Muslim world, especially the Middle East, is changing rapidly. And it will change even more. And we can see the rapprochement, the normalization of relations between Israel and the Gulf countries already, of course, Jordan and Egypt made peace many decades ago. And now, of course, you've got Oman, Morocco, Bahrain, the UAE. Very soon it'll be Saudi Arabia, probably Kuwait as well. Who knows? Maybe Qatar too. So you're seeing a normalization, and don't think that Algeria, Tunisia will be left out. They won't. There'll be pressure put on them, economic pressure from America, etc., to normalize relations. And they're looking at the bigger picture, you see, because what they're seeing. See, I mean, look at it from a Saudi perspective. We say they are traitors and Ghaddars, making peace with Israel. Israel has stolen Palestinian land, kicked out the Palestinians from their homes. 800,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed, were eradicated from 700 villages by the terrorism of the Zionist groups, the Haganah, the Irgun, the Sterngang, the Palmach. These were internationally recognized terrorist groups, and funded, of course, backed up by Britain, France, America, Russia. These are the countries that created, that funded and basically created Israel at the expense of the Palestinians, and we lost the third holiest place in Islam, Al-Aqsa. So let's not forget, what the issue is here, and yet, the Gulf Arabs, led by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are saying, well, never mind about all that. Never forget Al-Aqsa. I'll give it to the Jews. That's no problem. Palestinians, listen, you just have to forget about East Jerusalem as your capital, and your control over Al-Aqsa. Just forget about it. It's not going to happen. Go into Jordan. There's already 70% of Jordan is Palestinian. Go to Jordan. Go Syria, whatever. Just now, we're not interested in your plight anymore because we've got bigger issues like Iran. Iran wants to push its Shia ideology and control in the region to create a Shia crescent. Already it's achieved, we can see what's happening in Yemen already, of course, Syria, Iraq, of course, Iran, Lebanon, all of that. And of course, it's just a matter of time before Bahrain is brought in, and probably Kuwait as well. Pressure will be put on there. So, and as I said, you can see what's happening with Yemen, the situation with the Houthis there. So, yes, there is genuine fear that Iran is trying to Shiaize the whole of the Sunni world. Remember, until 1501, Iran itself was a Sunni country. I don't know how many people know that. Until 1501, Iran was a Sunni, Hanafi Shafi country. And it was, I think, Shah Ismail the first, or I think first, possibly, he came in, he was a Shia, and he forcibly converted Iran towards Shiaism, and kicked out the Sunni scholars, and threw out the Sunni books, and brought in Shia scripture and scholars and all the rest of it. So that is, this government is perhaps trying to do that. And of course, the reaction from Saudi Arabia, I suppose, is understandable, that they don't want Iran to have so much influence. Hence this very, very sad situation in Yemen with the minority Houthis who are Shia and aligned with Iran, trying to take over the country. And of course, the Saudis, I suppose, they felt they had to act. But we can see the incompetence there with the Saudis, the UAE, all these other troops in there, and they're still, the civilian population is suffering enormously. And now finally, after 5 years of utter destruction, and I mean, Yemen was one of the poorest countries in the world anyway, and now it's even poorer. I mean, it's basically being flattened, but from what we can see. So what's happening, of course, is that the Saudis and the Emiratis, they are saying, well, our best hope of preserving our independence and countering Iran is by jumping into bed with Israel and just doing whatever America tells us to do as well, which is not a terribly good idea, bearing in mind that many Israeli politicians like Lieberman, for example, a very senior politician in Israel, has openly, I've read it myself, he says openly, Islam is the number one enemy of Israel. We see Islam as the number one enemy. So the Israelis will do everything to wipe Islam out. I mean, they've made that crystal clear. Now, to jump into bed with them, with your sworn enemy, does not seem like a terribly good idea, even if it is for economic purposes, because what they're seeing also with Israel, technologically, is very advanced. And we know, electronic, from the electronics point of view, in terms of its high tech, it is advanced. So they're hoping that some of that, high tech stuff will head towards Saudi and the Gulf countries.
You spoke about, Iran, and there is a lot of talk about this nuclear disarmament, nuclear agreement, and all this. And I think Desmond Tutu made a statement regarding this nuclear arsenal, which is stockpiled in Israel, and 800 billion of the United States help throughout the years of the creation of a state of Israel.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
And why there is no transparency regarding this arsenal?
It's the most open secret probably in the world that Israel has a nuclear bomb. It developed it with South Africa, even gave South Africa, it proliferated it, gave South Africa the technology, under its apartheid system to develop the nuclear bomb. And so any country that is guilty of that, automatically there are sanctions, American sanctions against that country. And of course, that's why, one of the reasons why America refuses to acknowledge that Israel has got nuclear weapons. Then, it doesn't have to have them inspected by the AIEI, I think it is, or one of these atomic weapons.
Nuclear, yes.
Yeah. That Baradei was the head of until a few years ago, Mohammed al-Baradei. The fact is, Israel has at least 150 nuclear bombs. This has been mentioned over and over again. In fact, it was Mordechai Benunu, a Israeli scientist, a Jewish scientist, that converted to Christianity, and he blew the whistle on Israel. Said, "Look, Israel's got 150, bombs. I've been working on them." And of course, they kidnapped him from, I think, Italy or Rome or somewhere, and took him to Israel, and gave him, life imprisonment. So yes, so we know for sure that Israel has at least 150 nuclear bombs. It can wipe out, the entire region, and by not having to declare them, and when everybody knows them, they can do what they like. There are no sanctions against them. They're free to, to receive all this American money. If they acknowledge them, might be a different story. So yes, it's and of course these, how can you have sanctions against Iran to stop it from building a nuclear weapon when Israel has nuclear weapons and you're not doing anything, you're rewarding it? Doesn't make any sense.
Right. I think finally in Malaysia, this there was like a big
massive
news about the non-halal food labeled halal and.
Well, for 40 years apparently, meat was coming into Malaysia from, I think, Ukraine, China, and one or two other places, from South America. Haram meat labeled as halal, and mixed, horse meat and various other meats, and labeled as beef, and sold in Malaysia for 40 years, and nobody seemed to realize it. That is just incredible. For 40 years, they've been eating haram, thinking it's halal. And not only that, Malaysia is a major exporter of halal, Sharia compliant or halal compliant products, and like cosmetics and all the rest of it. But 9 billion, within that 9 billion of exports it does every year, are also food products. So the meat that's been receiving, turn it into whatever, canned food of whatever kind, and sending it to all over the place. And of course, if it ends up in a Muslim supermarket and it says halal on it, of course Muslims are going to eat it, and it's been haram all this time, more than likely. And that's why it's such a major scandal, because it doesn't just affect Malaysia; it affects probably all of us around, in the West especially, and whoever else has been eating a Malaysian meat with the halal label on it. So yeah, it's a major scandal, and that's why we all need to. I think the days when we could just go into a Muslim butcher's and it said lahm al halal and say, okay, we don't need to worry about it. I think personally, we have to be much more careful now, because the fact of the matter is, and this is something that we need to really, push home to the Muslim community, is we are eating too much meat, and there isn't enough halal meat available to satisfy the demand. And so what these people are doing, those who are supplying meat to us, is saying, well, if we can't get halal meat to satisfy demand, we'll get haram meat and just label it as halal. What's the big deal? If their iman is weak anyway, they'll say, so what? What's the difference? They can't see the difference between halal and haram. It's a case of making money. So if the demand can't be met with halal, then just bring in haram and label it as halal. And that is what's happening. So much food that we are eating, chickens and lamb and all the rest of it. We Muslims eat too much meat, and we've got to cut down on it, because the industry can't supply us with the amount of meat that we eat. And meat is not necessarily good for us. Once a week is fine, but in many households, if there's no meat, that's it. It's like, where's my dinner? My dinner equals meat. And if you don't have meat, it's like, it's almost an insult to even call it dinner. And that's how bad the situation is. And we've got to cut down on our meat consumption.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the last, maybe we finish with, because it's a new year. What is your message to Muslims, wherever they are?
Reform, reform, reform. And educate, educate, educate. Read, read, read. We are living in a world now that is changing very rapidly. COVID probably just put the brakes on that change a little bit. But those who are planning have got plans 50 years, 100 years ahead. We have a major role to play in this world. And, you look at the climate. We need to be, Islam is by nature green. The color of Islam is green. Islam teaches us to be green, to conserve and not to waste, and to look after the planet. This is an amana, a trust, not even a gift, but a trust from Allah, this world. And by pumping out so much, carbon and all the rest of it, that's destroying the ecosystem, that is changing the climate, we have to take a lead. We are 25% of the entire world. And our faith demands it, that we look after this world. So climate change is something that we need to take much more seriously, is going from bad to worse rapidly. Also, when you look at the changes which are happening in the Muslim world, we cannot leave it to our leaders. Our leaders are generally useless. They're pathetic. And we cannot just follow that ayah literally without understanding the actual meaning, where it says, Atiullah wa atiur Rasulullah wa ulil amr. that obey Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, and those who are ruling over you. Yes, you obey those who are ruling over you, so long as they're ruling according to Quran and Sunnah. And if they're not, then you have a responsibility as a citizen to bring about, of course, intelligently, I'm not talking about war and terrorism and bombs and stuff, but intelligently to bring about a change in your leadership so that it is compliant with Quran and Sunnah. That is a must for all of us. We cannot just look at our leaders, whether in the Gulf, whoever we are, and say, or in any part of the world, and say, well, the Quran tells us we have to just follow our leaders, and therefore, whether they're right or wrong, we have to follow. No, look at this, the tafsir of this ayah. It doesn't tell you to blindly follow leaders who are taking you away from what is in the interest of the ummah. So we have to take far greater interest and do what we can collectively. We need to come together. Unity at this time is so important that we get our heads together and say, how do we get ourselves out of this mess? We have Muslims in China who are suffering, millions of them, and we cannot do anything. We cannot even say anything, pretty much. We can say what we like, but nobody's paying any attention. Muslim leaders can do something, but they will not say anything. So there's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of changes happening, and we cannot just sit back and say, I can do nothing. No, there's a lot that we can do, and we'll be answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment if we sit back and do nothing and allow the situation to go from bad to worse. In this country, we've got a major problem with our children now. The education system is telling them, is encouraging them towards atheism, away from Islam. It's telling them you can be, if you're a boy, you can be a girl. You could be, if you're a girl, you can be a boy. You can transition. You can change your gender, mess yourself up as much as you like. We will, we the state will support you. It's telling children that, whether it's marriage between anybody is absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be between a man and a woman. It can be between two women, between two men. I mean, the children are being taught this. That's the worst part of it. This has been going around for many years, but children have never had it shoved down their throats from the age of 4, these things. So there's a lot of destruction that's happening. And AI is going to change things enormously. So a message for all of us, this is really important, is whatever trade you're in, don't think your job is safe for life. Now, AI in the next 20 years is going to make the majority, I would say, of the population, the working population, redundant. AI, there'll be no need for taxi drivers in a few years' time. There'll be no need for bus drivers. There'll be no need even for doctors. Nurses, possibly, because they do a number of different jobs, but even doctors and consultants. And all of this is going to be taken over by AI. There'll be no need for soldiers because it'll be all drones and pilot and stuff and all AI controlled. So there's going to be already over the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years, robots have kicked out most of the workers from car factories. It's all done by robotics. And that's the path it's going to take. So we need to ask ourselves, what jobs are we going to go into? How are we going to manage this new transition that is happening in the world? And as we are going more and more towards, of course, Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, and all these oil producers, they're thinking now, oil, people are going to, even if we've got tons and tons of oil for the next 100 years, people are moving away from oil because of the change, because it is obviously having a negative impact on the climate. So how we need to change our industries so that we're not reliant on oil. We're not reliant on gas. We're not reliant on fossil fuels, which are causing great damage to our climate. So we need to develop industries and jobs for our people that industries and jobs for our people that are sustainable. That's for the long term. Look at where technology is going. And we need to make sure that we are encouraging our children in terms of their education and their careers towards that direction, where they will actually get a job at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about, and a lot of changes we need to bring about within our lives and the kind of education we give to our children as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I think AR is artificial intelligence. Therefore, people are looking for careers and deciding what kind of jobs our children should be doing. So therefore, they need to think carefully what are they put them through, which career and what kind of skills they do. And of course, in future, individuals, I think, have to be multi-skilled as well. And because I think permanent jobs is gone, I think make the redundant, as Brother Asad said as well. Therefore, you have to be multi-skilled as well, and artificial intelligence and other things will take over as well. And we hope, inshallah, for the best for everybody. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us all, inshallah, in this new year. And bless you all, you, our viewers and our listeners as well. And bless our brother Asad Zaman for his input as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. And with that, we finish, inshallah, until we meet you next week, inshallah. We say, Subhanaka Allah bihamdik, nashhadu astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.